I would just like to say that I think the defendant should be kept from the public as long as legally possible.
A day after a series of assaults in Portland's South Tabor neighborhood, one of the alleged victims addressed the court.
The aggressive, gleeful display that he showed when he attacked me yesterday was horrifying.
That suspect, Portland police say, is 43-year-old Judson Defer, who they say groped two women out walking, inappropriately touched a woman inside a church, and cornered and attempted to rape a mother inside her own home.
This is incredibly unusual. Our thoughts go out to the women involved in these incidents. Nobody should feel unsafe in their home, in a church, in their neighborhood.
According to court documents, the woman inside the house heard the suspect walking up the stairs saying, "Honey, I'm here." She realized it wasn't her husband and put her 3-year-old behind her while holding her 10-month-old baby. Then documents describe how the suspect grabbed her and pulled her across the hallway into a guest room. She tried to fight him off, but the suspect allegedly pushed her down and attempted to remove her clothes. She asked the suspect, documents say, if she could put her baby in the crib and used the opportunity to barricade herself and both children inside another room with a bookshelf.
Fortunately, she was able to create some distance between her and the suspect, and at that point, the suspect fled.
Usually this is a very safe neighborhood, so it comes as a surprise and a shock that this happened.
When police arrived, a group of more than a dozen people pointed the suspect out to officers.
I think the good thing is, people are always watching out here because we are a tight-knit community, so when we do see stuff, we report it.
The suspect faces attempted rape and kidnapping charges. He also had, police say, outstanding warrants. He's due back in court tomorrow morning for a preventative detention hearing. David?
Just chilling details. Thanks, Alma. Appreciate it.
The door wasn't supposed to open. It was late morning in a quiet Portland neighborhood, the kind of peaceful silence that makes you believe nothing bad could ever happen there. Sunlight filtered through the windows, children's toys scattered across the floor, and somewhere outside, the steady sound of a man doing yard work carried on like any normal day. Inside the house, Grace Harrison held her baby close, moving gently, carefully, the way mothers do when the world feels calm and predictable. Then she heard it. The front door. Not a knock, not a creak she recognized, but the unmistakable sound of someone walking in. At first, it didn't make sense. Her husband was outside. No one else was expected. Yet the footsteps continued, slow, deliberate, climbing the stairs toward her. And then a voice broke the silence. "Honey, and I'm here." For a split second, reality bent. The words were intimate, familiar, but the voice was wrong, completely wrong. A cold wave of fear washed over her as her instinct screamed something was terribly off. Clutching her 10-month-old baby, Grace turned, her heart pounding so loudly it felt like it might give her away. In the corner of the room stood her 3-year-old child, unaware that their safe home had just been invaded by a stranger. The footsteps got closer, closer. There was no more time to question it. Someone who didn't belong there was already inside. Someone who didn't belong there was already inside. Grace didn't scream. Not yet. There's a moment. A thin, fragile second. When fear hasn't fully formed. When your mind is still trying to protect you from the truth. And in that moment, Grace Harrison stood frozen. Her baby pressed tightly against her chest, her ears straining, hoping she had misunderstood. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe the door hadn't opened. Maybe the footsteps weren't real. But deep down, she already knew. The house had changed. The air itself felt different, heavier, like something dark had slipped in unnoticed. Then she heard it again. A footstep. Closer this time, not hurried, not hesitant, confident. Whoever was inside wasn't lost. He wasn't confused. He was moving like he belonged there. Grace's heart began to race, each beat louder than the last, echoing in her ears as panic slowly replaced denial. Her grip tightened around her baby, who shifted slightly, sensing the sudden tension in her body. Across the room, her 3-year-old stood quietly, watching her, confused by the sudden stillness. Mommy?" the child whispered softly. Grace didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the doorway. Because now the footsteps had reached the top of the stairs, and they had stopped. Silence filled the house. Thick, suffocating silence. The kind that presses against your chest and makes it hard to breathe. He was there, right outside, waiting, or listening. Grace's mind raced. Her husband was outside. If she screamed, would he hear her? Or would it be too late? Should she run? Hide? Lock the door? There wasn't enough time to think. A shadow moved across the hallway. And then he appeared. A man she had never seen before stood in her home, close enough now that there was no doubt, no confusion, no mistake. This was real, and he wasn't supposed to be there. For a split second, neither of them spoke. They just stared at each other. Grace's breath caught in her throat as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. A stranger in broad daylight, inside her home, looking at her like she was the one who didn't belong. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile, not a nervous one. Something colder, something wrong. "Honey," he said again, his voice low, almost casual. "I'm here." The words sent a chill down her spine. Every instinct in her body screamed now. This man was dangerous. Grace slowly stepped back, pulling her 3-year-old closer toward the corner of the room, trying to create distance without triggering him. Her baby shifted again in her arms, a soft whimper escaping. The man's eyes dropped briefly to the child, then back to her. And something in that look made her stomach twist. He took a step forward. Grace's heart slammed against her ribs. Another step. "Stay back," she wanted to say. But the words wouldn't come out. Her voice had disappeared, swallowed by fear. He moved faster now. Before she could react, before she could turn, before she could even think, he was on her. His hand grabbed her. Hard. The force of it nearly knocked her off balance as she clutched her baby tighter, instinctively protecting the small life in her arms. "Come here," he muttered. And then he started pulling her, dragging her across the room. Grace gasped, panic exploding through her body as she tried to resist, her feet slipping against the floor as she struggled to keep her balance. "No, no, please," she cried, her voice finally breaking free. Her 3-year-old began to cry, confused and terrified, small hands reaching out. "Mommy!" But Grace couldn't reach back. She couldn't stop. He was too strong. He dragged her into the guest bedroom, the world around her blurring as adrenaline surged through her veins. Her mind was screaming now. This is happening. This is real. This is happening. He shoved her forward. She hit the bed hard, her body collapsing onto it as she struggled to keep hold of her baby. But he didn't stop. He pushed her face down, pressed her into the mattress. The weight of his body, his hands, it was overwhelming. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Her baby was still in her arms, still there, still vulnerable. And that's when something inside Grace shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but something stronger rose to meet it. Not panic, not helplessness, survival. "Please," she cried, her voice shaking violently, tears streaming down her face. "Please, my baby. Let me put my baby down. Please." For a moment, he hesitated. It was small, barely noticeable, But Grace felt it, and she knew this was her chance, her only chance. "Please," she begged again, softer this time, desperate, controlled. "She's just a baby. Please let me put her down." The room was silent, except for her sobbing breaths. Seconds stretched like hours. Then finally, he loosened his grip. "Fine," he muttered. "Make it quick." Grace didn't waste a single second. She moved fast, faster than she thought she could, clutching her baby and rushing out of the room, her legs barely holding her up as adrenaline pushed her forward. The crib. She needed the crib. Her hands trembled as she gently placed the baby inside, her heart breaking at the confused little sounds the child made. "I'm here," she whispered quickly. "I'm here." But she couldn't stay. She couldn't comfort her. Not yet. Because he was still there. Still inside. Still coming. Grace turned, her eyes locking onto her 3-year-old, who stood frozen, tears streaming down their face. "Come here," she whispered urgently. The child ran to her, and this time, Grace ran, not away from the house, but deeper inside it, to the only place she could think of. A room, a barrier, something, anything. She pulled her child in, her hands shaking violently as she looked around. No lock, no safety, nothing. Then her eyes landed on the bookcase. Without thinking, she grabbed it, pushed, strained, the weight nearly too much. But fear made her stronger. And the bookcase scraped across the floor, loud, desperate, blocking the door as best as she could. Her breathing was ragged now, her entire body shaking. "Help!" she screamed. "Help!" Her voice tore through the house, through the walls, out into the yard. "Help us!" she screamed again, and again, and again, because now there was nothing left to lose. Outside, the sound of yard work stopped. Silence. Then, movement. Footsteps. Not his. Different. Faster. Urgent. And inside the house, the man froze. For the first time. He hesitated. And then, he ran. The house didn't feel the same anymore. Even after the footsteps faded. Even after the front door slammed. Even after the silence returned. Something had been left behind. Fear doesn't leave when danger disappears. Sometimes, that's when it settles in the deepest. Grace stayed pressed against the door, her entire body trembling as she held her child tightly. Her ears strained, listening for anything. A creak, a breath, a sign that he hadn't really gone. But there was nothing. Only the sound of her own heartbeat. Then, suddenly, "Grace?" Her husband's voice, loud, panicked, close. She broke. The strength that had held her together through the nightmare collapsed instantly as she shoved the bookcase aside with shaking hands. The door flew open, and there he was. Her husband rushed in, his face pale, eyes wide with terror as he took in the scene. The overturned furniture, the crying child, the look on Grace's face. What happened? But Grace couldn't answer. She tried. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Only sobs. Deep, uncontrollable sobs that shook her entire body. He was here," she finally managed to choke out. "He was inside." Her husband's expression changed instantly, from confusion to something darker. Rage. Protective, primal rage. He ran through the house, checking every room, every corner, every possible hiding place. But the man was gone. Gone like he had never been there. Except he had been. And the evidence was everywhere. Minutes later, sirens filled the air. Police cars pulled up, lights flashing, cutting through the quiet neighborhood like a warning that something terrible had happened here. Officers rushed in. Questions came fast. Too fast. What did he look like? Which way did he go? Did he say anything? Grace sat there, barely able to process it all. She was still shaking, still hearing his voice in her head. "Honey, I'm here." Over and over again. When officers found her, she was still crying, still trying to hold herself together as she explained what had just happened inside her own home. They listened carefully. Every detail mattered. Because what they were beginning to realize, this wasn't random. It started before Grace, long before her door opened. That same morning, just hours earlier, something strange had already begun unfolding in the neighborhood. At a nearby church, a woman had been approached by a man she didn't recognize. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Until it did. He got too close, too familiar. Then, suddenly, he touched her, inappropriately, without warning, without permission. She pulled away, shocked, confused. But before she could react further, he ran, disappeared. At the time, it seemed like an isolated incident. Disturbing, yes, but over. It wasn't, because not long after that, another woman, then another, different locations, same pattern, approach, assault, escape. By the time police started connecting the dots, a picture was forming, one that was far more dangerous than anyone had realized. This wasn't a single act. This was a spree, a man moving through the neighborhood, searching, targeting, escalating. And then he found Grace. Back at the scene, officers worked quickly, gathering descriptions, building a timeline. Every second counted, because if he was still out there, someone else could be next. Radio calls went out. Units spread across the area, eyes scanning streets, sidewalks, alleys, and then a break. Suspect located. Just blocks away. Walking. Like nothing had happened. Like he hadn't just invaded a home. Like he hadn't just tried to destroy a life. Officers moved in fast. "Stop! Police!" He didn't run far this time. Within moments, it was over. Judson C. Defer was in custody. But the story didn't end there. Because once they had him, the truth started to unfold. And it was worse than anyone expected. The headlines would call it an arrest, a case, an incident. But for Grace, it was something else entirely. It was the moment her home stopped feeling safe. Even days later, the memories didn't fade. They replayed, over and over. The sound of the door, the footsteps, the voice. That voice. "Honey, I'm here." It echoed in her mind at the most unexpected times, in the quiet moments, in the stillness of night, in the spaces where safety used to live. Sleep became difficult. Silence became uncomfortable. Every small noise carried meaning now. Every shadow felt different. Because once something like that happens, you don't just forget it. You learn to live around it. Police confirmed what they had feared. Defer wasn't just responsible for what happened to Grace. There were others, at least 4 victims, possibly more. Women who had crossed paths with him that same day. Women who had experienced the same confusion, the same fear, the same violation of space and safety. A pattern, a trail, one that could have continued. If Grace hadn't survived, if she hadn't fought, if she hadn't thought fast in a moment where everything could have gone wrong. Her decision to protect her children, to create distance, to barricade herself, it changed everything. It stopped him. Not just for her, but for whoever might have been next. Defer now sits behind bars, no bail, waiting, facing charges that could define the rest of his life. But justice doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the fear. It doesn't silence the memory. It only draws a line A line between what was and what comes after. Back in that quiet Portland neighborhood, life is slowly returning to normal, at least on the surface. The sun still rises, children still play, neighbors still wave. But for one house, one family, one woman who heard a door open when it shouldn't have, nothing will ever feel quite the same again. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't the attack itself. It's how normal everything seemed right before it happened.